Hi, so welcome Senamiso Moyo. Some of you will know him from 6 Foot Weights, and he is a lawyer as well. So a lot has been happening in South Africa, Zuma's arrest, the looting, a lot of unrest that is happening in South Africa. So I thought who better than to speak to than Senna to give us a lowdown on, what's happening in South Africa, because I know a lot of us have been engaging, but loosely, but it'll be really helpful to get an overview. So, Senna, before we start, how are you?
Good, Nat. How's it going?
Good, good, good. No, I am good. I'm good. Thank you for taking the time. So, yeah, the floor is yours. Like, if we can start with how did we get here? I'm specifically talking about Zuma's arrest. Um,
Mm,
I understand he's in contempt of court. But yeah, if you could just give us an overview
mm.
of how we've got there.
Ooh, I think let me just pick it up from when the actual commission of inquiry was like launched or started or founded, whatever it is. So I think during Zuma's years, I think we're all familiar with the whole Gupta family and how they had their hands on state enterprises and how they were making big government decisions, right? Which minister to hire, which minister to fire, all that stuff which should ideally sit with the president or the executive or the National Assembly, whatever it is. They apparently were involved and they were paying big monies to ministers to make decisions in their favor, right? So this is apparently during Zuma's years. Fast forward to the end of Zuma's tenure, Ramaphosa comes into power and a commission of inquiry into state capture is founded. Right, this is about 2018. So the year after Zuma's out of office, State Capture Commission begins. Right, it's chaired by Deputy Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court, Raymond Zondo. So Zondo is chair of the commission. Now we'll get to him. He's like probably one of the stars of the show. But as the commission goes on, people are called in to testify. The way it works is you get issued with a notice, come to the commission. It's more like a summons, really. You can't say no. Like it's a government issued sort of thing, which is binding. So they issue with I think a summons and then they say appear at the commission. So what happened is they issued one to Zuma. I think he appeared the first time, but then they wanted him to come back, if I'm not mistaken. And then he said no. Now, the reason Zuma didn't want to appear is because he has a problem with the chair, Raymond Zondo. Zondo, apparently, Zuma alleges that they have beef dating back to 25 years ago, whatever it is, when I think Zondo was still a lawyer and I think he dated Zuma's sister in law. Right? So he's in Dabazabantu. Proper family dynamics, personal issues, two guys who don't like each other. So Zuma comes in, he says, well, you can't make me testify. You can't make me appear before a commission with someone who clearly has a bias against me. I can't do that. So what he then did is he went to the High Court and made an application for Zondo to recuse himself or to be recused. Or meaning in simple terms, when you have a feeling that a judge or whatever has a bias towards you, you can actually apply to a court that, sorry, can this person step aside? And then in an ordinary case, the Judicial Service Commission or whoever's judge president will allocate a different judge to hear the matter. So Zuma said, well, I can't testify in this commission with someone who doesn't like me and I don't like them. We have a history. Right? It's like if I go to a commission, I find one of my exes there. I'm like, oh, I'm not going to be keen to testify. So long story short, Zuma didn't testify because he said, well, I've still applied for this guy to recuse himself. So mina angizingeni. They then went to the court. So Zondo and the commission then went to the constitutional court and said, look, can you issue an order directing this man to come to the commission? They went to the Concord. The Concord issued the order, as naturally, I don't think it was opposed. They issued the order to say, no, look, Mr. Zuma needs to appear before the State Capture Commission. If he does not do that, he'll be in contempt of court, which is a criminal offense, right? Court order is issued. Zuma is told to appear. Zuma does not appear. In fact, he actually says, I will not appear at the Commission of Inquiry, repeatedly in that case and in public. What then follows is, I don't know how you can read it, or depending on where you stand, whether a political mistake, a judicial mistake, a miscarriage of justice, or an error by Zuma and his legal counsel, whichever it was. They decided not to attend the commission, and they were then found to be in contempt of court, right? So the Commission of Inquiry, or the State Capture Commission, and Zondo and Co., they go back to the court and they say, look, this man is not complying. He's not doing the things that you guys have ordered him to do. Can we get an order of imprisonment for his contempt? And a few weeks later, the Constitutional Court comes back and they say, well, Mr. Zuma will not attend the Commission of Inquiry. He has not attended, which means it's a criminal offense in itself to not attend, a thing. To be in contempt of court is a criminal offense. He then, long story short, is found guilty of contempt and is sentenced to 15 months in prison. There's a whole legal debate about whether or not that was the right sort of committal. I think we can all understand that he is guilty of the crime of contempt. I think what's up for debate is whether or not the Court, which is the final court in South Africa, acting as the final court, had the authority or should have actually imposed a sentence of imprisonment in what was initially just a civil case for them, without actually referring it to like a criminal trial. Did they have the authority to send him to prison, and is imprisonment without a suspended sentence? Because most of the time they say, well, you're guilty, we'll give you a suspended sentence, but if you do comply, then you're fine, you're not going to go to jail. So they went straight to imprisonment, no suspended sentence, no warning, no second chances to go and appear. And obviously Zuma's camp panic. Right? They start writing letters, they start trying to rescind the judgment, everything that they kind of do now. And there's not an uprising, but there's an uproar from his supporters and from Zuma himself. I think the court had initially given him 5 days to hand himself over. The day before he was meant to hand himself over, he had a gathering, rally, or whatever you want to call it, with his supporters in Gandla. They all came, they gathered, and he basically told his side of the story, that he feels he's been persecuted unfairly, he's been targeted politically, there's no merit in this whole thing. The prison sentence is a bit harsh because people hardly ever go to jail for contempt of court. So that got his people riled up, most of them Zulu, in KZN. They got riled up, they got angry. They felt like, okay, here, there is a miscarriage of justice. So even the hashtag was Wenzeni Zuma. Like, literally, it's like, what did Zuma do? The following day, he was meant to hand himself over. They then applied to rescind the judgment. And I think he was given another 3 days within which to hand himself over to the police. Wednesday came around, he still hadn't handed himself over. So now we're looking at the 5 days has passed. We've gone a full 7 days from the judgment. Zuma's still chilling in his house, and his supporters are literally waiting outside there with him kondo and sticks and whatever and guns. And they're saying, Tina Zuma's not going to jail, including one of his elder sons, Edward, I think. He then decides to hand himself over before the midnight deadline. He says, okay, I'll go to jail. He goes to prison, hands himself over. And 2 days later, literally on the Friday, his supporters, maybe riled up a bit also by his daughter and his son and his other supporters, then decide they're going to make this country ungovernable. So it started off with torching of trucks on the N3, somewhere close to Durban. They decided to set the trucks alight, they burned them, and there was huge damage. The whole road, like this is a major freeway, whole road closed, done, like Lutu. And it spread from KZN to other parts of the country. So now you've got people burning shops, you've got people looting shops, burning malls. there is chaos and a bit of anarchy. This is in KZN and mostly Gauteng. Every other province, I think, is still fine for now. I doubt in Cape Town there'll be any uproar.
Yeah. Did quickly stand up
Yeah.
before we move on to now talking about the looting and the unrest, I just wanted to go back on the so the the commission of inquiries, right? In terms of like what was their terms of reference? So what was really going to, with the inquiry and everything that was happening, did that commission have powers as, you know, in conclusion, say if Zuma had gone and they'd heard all sides, what was the extent of their powers? Could they arrest someone, or was it simply one of those commissions where the conclusion would be a report is published? Because the reason I ask that is it then makes me think that, okay, when they went to the court the first time saying, oh, he's in contempt of court, I mean, fine. But then when they went again saying, he's in contempt of court, therefore be criminalized. So it's just weighing, was that, could they have gone to Concord or maybe a lower court, and got a different outcome? It's just curious to me.
There may be. There may be. So just to answer your first question, what happens with the Commission of Inquiry, like most commissions in South Africa, really? The chairperson, Zondo, will then compile a report, which will have his findings and recommendations, I think, but I think mostly findings. And then that will be taken to the prosecuting authority, which will then take on criminal charges against the people who've been found in the report to have committed certain offense. So the report itself, or the inquiry itself, is not final. What the inquiry does is it compiles evidence in a report, which is then taken to the NPA. The NPA will then choose to prosecute. That's how it should proceed. With regards to the issue of the commission actually going to the Constitutional Court in the first place, that's another issue because that's actually being debated now legally. Should they have had direct access to the final court in the land instead of going to the High Court, for example, to try and get a criminal sanction? I think they're very entitled to do that based on the gravitas of the case, the nature of the state of, the state capture inquiry, the people it involves. I mean, it's a lot of there's a lot of high level politicians that are testifying. So it only makes sense, I think, for the highest court in the land to also hear it. The only issue is the finality that comes from the Constitutional Court, because you can't appeal to a higher court. There is no higher court. So if in that respect, you might think, if they'd maybe gone to a lower court, could have gotten a different decision. Who knows what would have happened? But yeah, so that's kind of how we find ourselves
Mm.
in this mess
And
that we're in right now.
right now, what's the date today? Today is the 13th of July, because I know these things change really quickly. What's happening?
Yeah.
Because I know yesterday, Advocate Dalimboff, I think, was speaking before the Concord.
Yeah.
So has a decision been made, or are they still deliberating?
So what Zuma and his lawyers, which now include Dalimbofu, what they're trying to do is to rescind the Constitutional Court judgment. So to basically have it set aside on the basis that all the things I've mentioned before, the direct access argument, whether or not the sentencing itself was reasonable in light of the circumstances for a contempt of court thing. Zuma's also trying to make the case that no, he was ill. It's all these other things, all these many factors that they're trying to put forward. That's what they're trying to do now. Whether or not they will succeed, it's a story for another day. Because I was listening to one of the justices say that, no, this is a civil case. So why are you now bringing in criminal sort of penalties in the whole proceedings? Surely it makes sense to send it to another court and start a criminal trial for his contempt of court. No, it sounds very technical, bit weird, but that's kind of where they are now. So the judgment has been reserved. So I think we'll kind of have to wait a couple of days or weeks before that comes down. And until then, I think Ubaba he'll be in jail. Well, he'll sit in jail.
Yeah, but okay, so turning to sort of like the looting and everything where we are now. So can we talk about Zuma's children? You talked about Edward, you talked about Duduzile, and
Yeah.
yeah, can you just talk about the role that they've played?
So in on Friday, when the initial sort of skirmish started with the burning of the trucks in on the N3, his daughter Duduzile then said, I think she was putting out a whole bunch of tweets saying, "We see you, Amandla comrades. It's a war. We're not deterred. Blah 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 blah." Edward was chilling in front of the gate saying, "We will fight. We'll do all these things," and that kind of encouraged people to take up arms. Now, what I think has happened is similar to Fees Must Fall when I was in varsity. It started off the catalyst being Zuma's arrest. That's what sparked everything. That was the fire that sort of started the whole thing, which is now spread and has become something bigger than just Zuma. I think it's become frustration at government. I think the fact that we're now in level 4, and for those without sort of context, level 4 means we're one step below a very strict lockdown, essentially. So we can't do much, and can't, no alcohol, no gyms. Well, there was no gyms when it was announced. No restaurants, were basically hard lockdown. Um, that has meant people's livelihoods have been compromised, and as a result, a lot of frustrations which have been bubbling under the last year of people being unemployed, people having no food. On top of that, a lot of them also being Zuma supporters, now seeing Zuma go to jail. All of it adds up to this cocktail of violence that we have now. And Ramaphosa has tried to address it. I think he initially tried to play it off as like an ethnical issue or an ethnic thing, which I think it was very ill-advised to say that, my own personal opinion. But that's kind of the role that his children have played. They were the kind of the initial, yes, start a revolution, start a war, start a riot, start this, start that. But since then, I think it's rolled up to be bigger than even what they thought it would be. And more than, I don't even think they intended the damage and the violence to be that high. I think they just wanted their father freed. But I think where we're at now is, yeah, military deployed and everything.
Yeah.
It's a proper mess.
Am I correct in saying like this is the worst, like in terms of in the last 10 or so years in recent South African history, like in terms of looting, it just feels like on an hour to hour basis, it's just getting worse.
The anarchy,
Yeah.
it might actually be the worst. Fees Must Fall was bad, but that was, almost sort of centralized to universities and surrounding areas. Like I remember at the time I was in Fitz, and for 2 years, 2015 and 2016, there'd be start of a protest against fees, which would then spiral into the streets and tear gas and buses burning, shops looted, all these things. But this on a national scale is hard, I think, for even government to bring together and bog down. And that's mainly because with universities it's easy, you know where the universities are, and you can kind of contain the violence to within that space. And it's easier to deal with students as well. Students, most of them are compliant, they're very peaceful, they're smart chaps. Now you're dealing with all kinds of people in society, like a free for all. When they say Jabulani Mall in Soweto was being looted, it's being looted by almost anyone and everyone who lives in and around that area. So it's bad. I think it might be the worst, depending on how long it goes on, because obviously the situation is changing every day. Marikana was probably the lowest moment, I think, post 94 South Africa. Marikana was when there were the miners who were protesting for 12,500 rands a month, I think, and they got gunned down by live ammunition. apparently under the instructions of Cyril himself. That's definitely the lowest point in the history of post-apartheid South Africa. Depending on how this plays out, it could be the worst. COVID isn't making it easier, I'm afraid, but this could potentially be worse. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say that actually, if you look across countries, I think the frustrations that people have with COVID, there's been uprisings in some form. Look at France, even the UK, people were out protesting. So and then okay, so just going back to what you were talking about, is there like what level of support does Zuma have within government? Because I've seen comments about, there are people that have been on mute, um, some people not saying much, and then accusations of, some of these uprisings or whatever being coordinated by people within government. So yeah, what level of support does Zuma have? And yeah, how precarious is Cyril Ramaphosa's situation considering that?
Um, the problem that Cyril faces, I think, in my opinion, and people might feel free to disagree and add their 2 cents to what I'm about to say, but I think his stock hasn't been high. I think his presidency's been a bit mediocre, and it's unfortunate because if you look at the past presidents, I'll start at Mandela. Mandela had a certain larger than life thing. He's Mandela could get away with anything. I mean, he was almost an icon, demigod of some sort, right? He's Mandela, like bigger than him. Mbeki was very smart, but on top of that, his father was also, one of the guys who was sent to prison with Mandela. So he's sort of some sort of ANC royalty in a way. Add that to his intelligence, you have a very okay president, whose popularity was there for all to see, but his intelligence was also evident. Like you could say, oh, Beg is really smart. You could say that's my president. He's a very clued up sort of guy. May have an issue with his policies. He was a bit cowardly in how he dealt with certain things like HIV and Robert Mugabe, but you couldn't doubt that there's a politician's brain in there. Zuma represents South Africa, I think, what the average man in the street wants to see from their leader. He's the people's guy, right? He's very popular in the sense that you can feel that he's just an ordinary gent. There's nothing amazing in the way that Mandela was about him. There's no super intelligence that Mbeki went and got, because Mbeki was educated in the UK and all these things, and his degrees, and he's speaking fancy English. But Zuma was different. He's a people's guy, had no education, he's multiple wives, he's your traditional Zulu gent. Like, he's part of the people. You can see that any one of us can rise to become president. That makes him incredibly popular with the average Black person in South Africa. Even when he was arrested, even his detractors will tell you that they felt a bit sad about the whole thing. On top of that, you have some of his political opponents like Helen Zille who'll say, well, I've spoken to Zuma, he's a charming man. He's this, he's that. In spite of all his crimes and imperfections, people always have a nice thing to say about Zuma. Cyril, on the other hand, unfortunately for me, has none of what all the other presidents ever had. Doesn't have the charisma. I don't think he has that intelligence that Mbeki sort of oozed. The charisma of Zuma is not there. The the image that was Mandela is also not there. So what you have is a guy who's sort of there, is not inspiring a lot. You can tell that when he's on TV, he's reading from, a prompted thing. Zuma would come on TV, he would read, and then he'd put the paper down and he would start speaking in Zulu and start laughing, cracking jokes. And you'd be like, hey, actually, I hear what he's saying. I think at times, Cyril hasn't been able to get across with the average person. Now, politically, when he took over, and it's unfortunate, he took over a very divided ANC. He had one half that was for him and one half that was against him. So you still have very strong supporters of Jacob Zuma within the ANC. He's trying to get rid of them. You can see like when he suspended Ace Magashule, the Secretary General, and he's right now suspended Carl, one of the MK vet guys. And you can see that he's trying to make it, okay, we're chasing away corruption, or we're fighting corruption, but you can see that his opponents are people who were associated with the former President Zuma. In that sense, politically, it's a fragile situation to be in, because I don't think he has the support of the entire party, so to say, which is unfortunate. And I think in next year's Congress, so ANC, unfortunately, the timing of their Congress is a bit weird. So they have a Congress, and then there's national elections that follow after that. So the Congress decides who the president will be for the next 5 years, and then the national elections will decide who the president of the country is. So president of the ANC is obviously, most instances, end up being the president of the party, of the country, the following year. So I think if he's not careful, he might lose popularity in the party. There's a chance, a very small chance, I think, because I don't think he has a proper rival, that he may lose at Congress and then lose the chance to run at the presidency again. And I think this whole Zuma situation doesn't help his support base a lot. In fact, I think it marginalizes a lot of the guys who, maybe just for the sake of Uguti, Zuma was part of the ANC, will vote for Cyril. I think this might just mean, actually, I don't really like this guy. He can go. And I think Zuma has the power to take away a lot of votes from the African National Congress in that regard. But I stand to be correct on that point. But I think Zuma has a huge pull, both internally within the party and amongst the ordinary members of the public.
Yeah. And in terms of like Cyril and just the situation that he's in, if they go to Congress, like who's next in line? Like who's the next star that could be put as the leader of the ANC?
There's David Mabuza, the current deputy president, although DD, as they call him, he's been sort of MIA during Cyril's run at the presidency. He's also been sick. He's been flying overseas to get treatment, and the whole Chiwenga thing where he's just never there. So what you have now is a situation where either DD challenges him and he wins the presidency. Ace was another one who could properly, challenge Ramaphosa, the Secretary General. He's currently suspended. Whether or not his suspension will be lifted remains to be seen. But he was the one person, I think, with the sort of charisma, authority. He's also got his own corruption allegations or whatever, but I think he was the one person, I think, with the charisma and the status to sort of give sort of a good run for his money. Another one maybe is Lindiwe Sisulu, Walter Sisulu's daughter. She could also give it a run. And yeah, I think what it remains to be seen who will lift up their hand over the next year, so to say, and be like a proper challenger. Until then, Cyril will kind of just have to navigate this awkward period that he finds himself in.
Okay. Just so second last question. EFF, Julius Malema, the DA, like what role do they play? Because I've seen Malema sort of I guess sort of showing that I think he's against what's happened with Zuma. So yeah, what's
There are
their
no
stance?
permanent, I think there are no permanent enemies in politics. I think that's what Julius has shown us. I think the EFF especially, their preference is to always undermine the ANC. Could be wrong, but I think they always want to undermine the ANC. And he's, surprisingly, for someone who was against Zuma all this time, he's surprisingly shown some sort of solidarity towards him, and he's tweeted that no, imprisonment wasn't the way to go. They've also expressed that they support not support the looting, but they support the protests, and they're against the deployment of the military. The EFF at the moment is probably Cyril's worst nightmare. Politically, I think they're a bit of a nuisance in the sense that they're also rallying up people to say, no, look, guys, look, this leader here is incompetent. He wants to send the military on you. It doesn't help that um, Marikana was sort of his thing. And I say his because I think he's the one who sent the email to the police commissioner giving instruction for them to deal with the situation, which then led to dead bodies. So in that respect, the EFF is, I won't say promoting the looting, but they're promoting non-compliance with whatever Cyril was saying. If he says, let's go to level 1, they will protest it, more or less. The DA, I think they've become friends of him in a way. And I hate to say that, but I think you can see that we celebrate, they'll release a statement saying we celebrate Jacob Zuma's imprisonment. We celebrate the decisiveness by the judiciary. The president has taken this decision. We welcome it. And you're like, okay, friends of Ramaphosa in a way. A lot of his policies have unfortunately been perceived to be pro-white monopoly capital, to be pro-Stellenbosch mafia guys, corporate white people. I think it's alleged that they're the ones that are sort of paying him. Whether or not that's true, I'm not sure, but you can kind of see it in some of the decisions he's made, that there's a bit of an inclination towards favorable policies for white guys here. And I think the DA aren't probably his worst nightmare at the moment.
Okay, no, that's interesting because like the Helen Suzman Foundation, WMC, and all that stuff has kind of propped up. So I guess it's really not helpful. And then just lastly, like, you know, I don't even know like how to ask this question because you've got a political situation, right? A political problem, chaos, and then you've got the judiciary and the role that it plays. But I mean, how will this be solved? Because essentially, it's the judiciary versus the politics of it.
Yeah.
How is it solved in a way that doesn't undermine the judiciary?
So there's been calls for the judiciary to kind of blindly continue. So that's just to continue with the law as it says. If he's in contempt, he's in contempt. Arrest him, he must appear. Even if they try to rescind the judgment, apply the law to Zuma as you would to any other person. The problem is, has it been applied to Zuma as it would any other person? Like, would anyone else go to prison for contempt of court? Not many people would, to be honest. I think most people would get a suspended sentence and then be forced be forced to appear. What the court said was because of Mr. Zuma's status and because Zuma has repeatedly said he will not attend, a suspended sentence wouldn't work. So in that way, he has in a way been treated as a different accused, not an ordinary accused. He's been treated with his political status in mind. They've bore in mind that, no, look, we want to set an example by sending the past president to jail, that to show that the rule of law is the rule of law and anyone before it has to abide by it, right? So in that sense, they've sort of treated him like in view of his political status. But you have to say that it hasn't been a blind judiciary. They've been very aware of some of the facts that come into it, the politics at play. But what they mustn't do is be pressured to then change their minds. I think they've made the decisions they've made, but if they're seen to be going back on it, it creates a precedence where, unfortunately, people be like, oh, we don't like this, take to the streets, protest. Right. I'm not saying I agree with the initial decision, but now that they've made it, going back on it would be it wouldn't be wise for safeguarding, the judiciary. Even if President Ramaphosa comes back and says, okay, presidential pardon, I'm releasing Jacob Zuma. Zuma comes, he talks to his people, Bantu Bami, please keep quiet, Kali Pansi, let's all go home. It's fine now. It sets a precedent that, oh, okay, so anarchy is the only way that these guys will listen to us, which isn't a great way to govern a society. But then I struggle at the moment, as we speak now, it's 13 July, to see how, without Zuma himself coming out and saying, guys, stop it, or without Zuma being released, how you quell such violence, especially because it's so widespread, right? It's not like you're dealing with one crowd, you're dealing with different patches and different groups of people in different parts of the country, which isn't easy to do. How does this end? I think it loses momentum probably over the next few days. And then the judiciary continues with its decision. I think they'll keep Zuma in prison. I don't see them going back on their decision. And then I think Zuma goes out on parole after a month or two.
Okay, I was gonna say, like, I don't see Zuma being imprisoned for 15 months and
No.
everything being okay.
Yeah. So I doubted that he'd go in the first place. Like I
Yeah.
was unsure that he'd hand himself over because he was so adamant. I'm not going. I'm not going. But I'm not going. And I couldn't just imagine sending a former president to jail in Africa. It doesn't really happen in this continent. Um, but now that he's in, I must say, similar to his friend Shabir Sheikh, if you just read up on Shabir Sheikh, Sheikh was in prison for a few years. He got medical parole. He was out, and apparently he was terminally ill when they released him. To this day, Sheikh is still up and about.
Amazing, amazing. No, Senna, thank you so much. And again, as we said, it's the 13th of July, guys. We know that things are very fast moving. But it's interesting just watching what's happening in South Africa as one of the main players in the continent. And I think for me, it just goes to show that it's really each country for themselves
In
because,
a way,
yeah,
when was it when there was when was the looting again in Zim? The Tato Kwanisayo era, was that
2019, beginning of
2019? What
2019.
beginning of 2019? Yeah, if people were like Tato Kwanisayo.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, it
Yeah,
just shows that, and I mentioned that, even in the West and other countries, there's just so much internal unrest that the models
yeah,
that we look out for, like, oh, UN, SADC, AU, like, it's really not going to work. And how
yeah.
as them will be like, oh, what is South Africa doing to put pressure? Look, South Africa is crumbling, so there's no way.
On its own, yeah.
Exactly,
They're
like,
dealing with their own very, very difficult situation right now.
exactly. So I think it's time for it's an interesting time in just global politics because each country literally just has to find its own solutions, and where they're dictators and whatever, like, the solution just has to come from the people. But that could be another topic for another day. So Senna, thank you so much. Senna, where can people find you on the
Ooh,
social?
people can find me on the social media streets at Senamiso Moyo, Senamiso Moyo, on all social media platforms. That's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I can't say, oh, I'm not on Snapchat and all these other things. So just those three. I'm on TikTok. I am on TikTok, but I don't post on TikTok. So all those three, um, on my Twitter and on my Facebook and IG, you'll find threads that I do weekly on IP cases or hashtag IP Thursday. You should check that out. And also follow and like the podcast at 6 Foot Weights that I do with Tabo every week. So yeah, that's where the people can find my stuff.
Thank you, Senna. And guys, tune into 6 Foot Weights. Thank you.
Bye.